How's it going, guys? This is Script Tactics here, and today we're going to be going over the OpenWRT setup for WireGuard that are in my slides. So those are going to be linked down below in the description. They are on my GitHub as well. I will be putting a link down in the description box below, but let's go ahead and get started. So as you can see here, I'm going to be doing most of the steps in the terminal, which is how I have them linked in the slides. So the section will be slide 20, and the first part begins on slide 21. So I'm SSH'd into my OpenWRT router here. And first thing, just like the slides say, is we're going to do opkg update. And this is just going to pull down all the packages that we can install for OpenWRT. We're going to let this finish. It might take a few seconds, but usually it's pretty quick. And just like that, signature check passed. Okay, so now we're going to actually install two packages here. opkg install wireguard-tools and luci-app-wireguard. So the first one, wireguard-tools, is the actual package for WireGuard, but the luci-app-wireguard allows us to do a little bit more, where there's like a status page and we can actually see our connections. So we're going to install both of those. And let that run. Okay, so once that's installed, now we're going to start setting up some environment variables. So the first thing we're going to do is wg_if, and this is just our WireGuard interface name. So I'm naming mine wg0. Then we're going to do WireGuard port equals, and by default it's always going to be 51820, but you can change this to whatever you want. And then we're going to do wg_addr equals, and I'm going to use the 10.0.0.1. 10.0.0.1/24 subnet. So you can make this whatever you want as long as it's within the RFC 1918 specifications, which is all internal or private IP addresses. Just make sure it doesn't clash with your current IP. So if your IP range is this 192.168.1.1/24, which is 192.168.1.1 through 192.168.255, just make sure it doesn't clash with that and just change the IP there. So once that's set, we're good there. And now we're going to start going on to setting up our keys. So the next command is going to be umask u equals rw, comma g equals, comma o equals. Next we're going to do wg genkey, which is a WireGuard generate key command. We're going to pipe that output to the T command, wgserver.key, and make sure I spell that right, K-E-Y. So this will be our private key. And we're going to pipe that into the wg command again using pubkey, and we're going to say output that into wgserver.pub. So now if you type ls, you should see our private key, which is this over here, and our public key. So now we're going to continue, and we're going to set the pre-shared key, so wg genpsk out and wg.psk. So if you type ls, now we'll have three: pre-shared key, a server key, and a public key. Now we're going to do wg_key equals, and we're going to do that, this, and this. And we're going to say cat wgserver.key, and with parentheses and with quotation. And then we're going to say wg_psk and do the same thing, quotation, $, parentheses, cat wg.psk, and same thing, parentheses, quotation, and wg_pub, and just as you guessed, $, parentheses, cat wgserver.pub. That and that. Okay. Next, we're going to have to do some firewall rules here. So this one's going to be a little long, but just follow through. And again, all the commands I'll be putting on the slides, and I'll also try to put these down in the description below. So it's going to be UCI rename firewall.at_zone0 equals LAN. UCI rename firewall.at_zone1 equals WAN. So this just renames the firewall rules, or the firewall zones rather, to LAN and WAN. If you do have something else predefined, you may want to avoid doing this step, and you're going to have to kind of make your setup match this, but this is assuming that you're on a clean install. Next we're going to do is UCI rename firewall.at-forwarding 0 equals LAN_WAN. So that just created a forwarding rule from the LAN to the WAN. And we're going to do UCI del_list firewall.lan.network equals, and we're going to do wg_if. And these are curly braces here. Next, we're going to add it. So we're just going to say same command, except instead of del list, it's going to be add list. And then we're going to delete. So UCI-Q delete firewall.wg. So this gets rid of any firewall.wg. So as you see before, we have firewall.lan. So this assumes that this was created already, but we're just going to do a clean start here. If you already have that, again, you're going to want to modify these commands coming forward so that it works for your setup. So now we're going to do UCI set firewall dot wg equals rule. Then we're going to do UCI set, and we're going to do the same thing again, except instead of wg, we're going to do dot name, and now it's going to be Allow-WireGuard. And then here we're going to say wg source, and we're going to say WAN, and then we're going to do DST_port, and this is going to be that, and we're going to do wg_port. Next we're going to do proto, and this is just specifying the protocol, and we're going to delete all that, and we're going to say UDP, because that's what WireGuard. So that's good there. So what we basically just did is we created a new rule for the WG zone in the firewall. We named it Allow-WireGuard. We said, okay, connections coming from the WAN zone, anything that gets forward to this port, which we set above here, right here, 51820, this is where that value comes in, and the protocol is UDP. And then we're just going to do one more thing here, and we're going to say target, and we're going to do all caps except. So now once that's done, you just type UCI commit firewall, and then we're going to do /etc init-d firewall restart. Okay, so now we just set up the firewall rules, and now we just got to quickly create a network interface for the WireGuard. So we're going to do UCI again -q delete network dot $ squiggly brackets wg_interface. Now we're actually going to set it. So UCI set network.wg equals interface. And then we're going to do the same thing here, except we're going to say .proto to set the protocol for this network interface, and this will be WireGuard. And then we're going to set the private key _key, and then we need to set this to wg_key, and we're going to say listen port _port and wg_port, and the final piece here is going to be addresses addresses and wg_addr. Now you could do this again if you had an IPv6 range, but we're only going to worry about IPv4. And then similar to what we did with the firewall, UCI commit firewall. I'm sorry, UCI commit network. And then we're going to do /etc init.d network restart. Now this might take a second. And now we're all good. Okay, So that's all we have to do currently in the console. We're going to switch over to the graphical user interface and the Luci app on OpenWRT, and we're going to continue with our setup there. Okay, so here we are at the login screen for the OpenWRT console. So again, this is a new install, so I don't have a password, so you would put in your credentials and then hit login here. So here we're going to go to network, and we're going to go to interfaces. So now you should see this WG interface set up, and you should see the IPv4 set up, WireGuard VPN, it's been up for a minute, no RX and no TX. So we're going to come in here and we're going to hit edit, and everything should be pre-generated and everything. So we're going to go over to peers here, and in the slides, I have a section on slide 26 that says adding a peer. So in OpenWRT, there's two ways you can go about this. We're going to go with option 1 first, and then we're going to go through option 2 after that. So first we're going to do is we're going to hit add peer. We're going to add a description here. So I'm going to name this peer option 1. You can name this whatever you want, but this is what we're going to do here. We're going to leave these two values blank, but we will generate a pre-shared key here. Now allowed IPs, we're going to do 10.0.0.2/32. So this value has to be within the subnet range that we specified for the interface on the server. So on the server is 10.0.0.1/24. The range of 1 is occupied currently by the tunnel. So our first peer can get 2 through 255. So that's why this is 2. But you cannot have another peer use this IP address. We're then going to do root allowed IPs, and then that's all we can do right now. This public key section will be generated on the Android app or the peer that you're connecting with. So we'll have to switch back over to that and get that value. But I'm going to hit save for now. We are going to go back here, and you will also need the public key of the server. So let's grab this, copy, and then we're going to paste that into the WireGuard config on our Android phone. So now let's go switch over to the Android phone and show you how to set things up there. So here we are in my Android device. We're going to go over to the WireGuard application. And I already have this OpenWRT interface. So we're actually going to go and delete this. So let's go back here and trash. So then at the bottom here, let's actually make this a little bigger so we can see clearer. We're going to hit this plus button, and we're going to create from scratch. On the name, I'm going to name this OpenWRT. And then here in the private key, you should see this little circle icon. We're going to click this, and that'll generate our private and public key. Then below that, you're going to see addresses here. And we're going to make this the same address we just made on the GUI for the peer. So that was 10.0.0.2/32. List port we're going to leave off. DNS servers we're not going to set, or the MTU. Then we're going to come down to add peer. I'm going to click add peer. Public key. So this is where we're going to put the public key of the server, as well as the pre-shared key that we generated for the peer. So I'm going to put those in a second here. Endpoint. So this is going to be the public IP of your server. So in my case, it's 192.168.0.190. So this is a private IP, but for you, if you're using a public-facing server or your router that has connection to the internet, you need to look up your IP address. So that if you do what's my IP, or do an IPA, or look at the DHCP reservation for your WAN interface, that's the IP that you're going to put here. Then we're going to do colon, and we're going to do 51820, and that's the port number that we set for WireGuard. Now under allowed IPs, we're going to do 0.0.0.0/0, and that just means any IPv4 address, and then we're going to do :/0 for any IPv6 address. So let me go and paste this public key and the pre-shared key. I have to manually enter these in because of the way my VMs are set up, but we'll be right back once those are populated. So really quick, we're back in OpenWRT, back in the peer section. If you hit edit here, this pre-shared key here, and we're going to show this really quick. You're going to copy this value back to the pre-shared key section on Android. So if we go switch to that, you should see there it says pre-shared key under the public IP there, and that's where we're going to put this value in. This is going to go right there. So let me go ahead and do that, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so I've put the public key from the public key section on my server. I've put the pre-shared key from the peer section on my server. So if we switch back here, you should see now this pre-shared key went into that section over here. This public key came from the server. That value came from here, general settings, public key. This value went here. Now we just have to copy this value and we need to put it in the peer section right here. And then once that's done, you can save and apply the changes. So I'm going to go input this again. I have to do it manually, and once I populate that, I will save, and then we can check the connection. Okay, so I was able to get my public key put in there for my peer. Hopefully that's all correct. We're going to hit save here. We're going to hit save again, and I should see it has 2 pending changes. So we're going to hit save and apply. Now you may have to restart the WireGuard interface to get a connection established. I've had issues with that, so I'm just going to do this ahead of time just to make sure that everything's all working. Sometimes it needs a quick reboot to get it all up and running. So once it comes back up, it's going to take a second here to try to connect. Okay, we're then going to go switch back over to our Android peer. And we should see all our settings are set up. I want to hit this toggle. It's going to ask for a connection request. We're going to hit OK. We may just have to use our keyboard here. And okay, so it looks like we have a TX, meaning connections are being sent out, we're transmitting, but we're not getting an RX back. So sometimes that happens if your keys are wrong, and it's very possible because I did have to manually copy my keys over. Let me go and double check my keys, and we'll come right back and just verify that everything's good here. Okay, so yes, my keys were in fact incorrect. I just had to switch an O for 0, but everything looks like it's good. As you can see here, we have a latest handshake. We also have an RX, meaning we're receiving connection back, and we have a TX here. So we got the latest handshake, which is good. And we can also double check that over on the WireGuard interface. So let's switch back over here. And you should see we do have a TX and RX showing these numbers going up and down. And also, if you go over to status here, WireGuard, you should see your peers and peer option 1. So this shows you all the configuration set up for the peer. So we got the public key, the IP address that the peer is connecting from, as well as what port it's broadcasting over, the IP address that the current peer is using and what's allowed, and then all the data being sent back and forth. So that's how we do peer 1, or option 1 rather. Option 2 is a lot easier, and I recommend this way if you can do it, but for the sake of instruction, I wanted to show you both ways. So option 2, if we go over here to system, and we go to software, we're just going to update the list one more time. We're going to let this command, this is just going to run the opkg update. And this is just doing it from the GUI. This is the same command we just did in the terminal when we first started the tutorial. We're going to go to filter here. We're going to type QREN code. And this first one right here, we're just going to hit install and install again. Now we're going to let this load. Just give it a second here. It's configuring. It should say complete. If not, you can just dismiss this for now. And it looks like it does say it is installed. So if we go down to interfaces again, WG0, we hit edit. We go back to peers. We're going to hit add peer. We're going to name this option 2 peer. I think I named the one peer option 1, so we'll name this one peer option 2. And this is going to be so much easier. So all you're going to do is hit generate new key pair. So now this generates the public key and the private key for the peer. You're going to do generate pre-shared key, and then allowed IPs you're going to do 10.0.0.3/32. So remember, we already used 2 on our first peer, so because this is a new peer, we have to make another, we have to increment the number. We're going to hit the plus sign here. We're going to hit root allowed IPs, and at the bottom here you should now see this configuration export, and there's a button that's now available. So if we click this, you're going to see the connection endpoint gets preset, the allowed IPs get preset, and we're going to get either this text file that we can copy and paste over to our peer, or we're going to have this QR code. So now we can actually take our Android device and scan this QR code. So if I were to switch back to my Android here, and we just disable this connection, you can see this plus button here, and it says scan from QR code. So you would scan that and it would get a setup very similar to what we have here. The only difference is this addresses field will not be populated. So you will have to put this in for the value of the peer that you just set. So if you're scanning this from a QR code, just remember you have to scan this addresses here. Now, because this Android device is in a virtual machine, I do not have access to a camera to actually show that going through, but the setup is exactly the same. There's no listen port. This should not be set. This should not be set. All the keys get populated the same, and all you have to do is hit the toggle here to connect once you set these addresses. So I'm going to switch back over to the OpenWRT. The one thing, once you've exported this, you're going to hit back to peer configuration. You should always delete this private key. You do not want this saved on the server. That would mean if anyone gets access to the server, they can then take your peer and they could copy the peer and they could spoof a connection. And that's not something you want to do. You want your peers to be in control of their private key. But other than that, we're going to hit save here. Save, and you just will have to save and apply again. And then once that refreshes, and if I were to then put in that connection, we should also see these numbers increment. And if we go to status and WireGuard, there should be another peer set here making a connection. Now it's not going to show because no handshake was created or made and there was no connection. But once you do make a connection, you'll actually show the peers that are set up down here. But that's how you do WireGuard with on OpenWRT with an Android app. And that's going over the same section across my slides over the OpenWRT section. So next up, we'll be going over how to do a travel router with a Raspberry Pi, going over very similar steps. The only difference is now the Raspberry Pi will be the peer using OpenWRT, and we're going to have a server set up, and that server could be OpenWRT as well. It could be pfSense, or it could be a VPS setup similar to my other tutorial. So now that's all I have for you today, and stay tuned for those next episodes. Thank you.